Think you know everything about the most iconic disco outfit in cinema history? Think again. From a bargain bin polyester suit that cost just $100 to a shirt that buttoned under the crotch, the costumes from Saturday Night Fever hide some truly bizarre secrets. Gene Siskel bought the famous white suit and outbid Jane Fonda. Travolta's family members secretly appeared as extras. And that red dress on the movie poster? It was never actually in the film. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Saturday Night Fever. Fact 1. The white suit cost only $100. When you think about one of the most famous costumes in movie history, you might imagine it was custom-made by top designers with a price tag to match. But the truth about John Travolta's iconic white suit from Saturday Night Fever is surprisingly humble. The costume designer, Patricia von Brandenstein, purchased the entire three-piece polyester suit off the rack from a small menswear shop in Brooklyn for just $100. This wasn't a case of skimping on the budget because they didn't care about how it looked, but rather a deliberate creative choice that perfectly matched the character's working-class background and made the whole story feel more authentic. Director John Badham had actually insisted that all the costumes in the film be purchased from regular stores instead of being specially made, both to keep costs down on the low-budget production and to make sure everything looked real and believable. Tony Manero, the character Travolta played, was a 19-year-old paint store clerk from Brooklyn who didn't have money for expensive clothes, so it would have made no sense for him to be wearing some fancy custom-tailored designer suit. Von Brandenstein went shopping in the actual neighborhoods where the character would have lived and shopped, finding the white polyester suit at a men's boutique in Bay Ridge, the same Brooklyn neighborhood where much of the movie was filmed. The costume designer knew exactly what she was looking for when she found that bargain suit, recognizing that its cheap polyester fabric and wide peak lapels were perfectly representative of what a young working-class guy in 1977 would actually wear to a disco. The fact that this $100 suit went on to become one of the most recognized and valuable pieces of movie memorabilia in history, eventually selling at auction for hundreds of thousands of dollars, shows just how much the right costume choice can elevate a character and define an entire era of film and fashion. Fact 2. The shirt buttoned under the crotch. One of the strangest design features of John Travolta's costume in Saturday Night Fever was completely hidden from view, but absolutely essential to making those dance sequences work. The black striped shirt that Travolta wore under the white suit jacket wasn't just tucked into his pants the normal way, but was actually attached to the waistband of his trousers, with elastic fabric and featured buttons that fastened underneath his crotch like a baby's onesie. This unusual construction meant that no matter how much Travolta twisted, jumped, or struck his now legendary dance poses, the shirt would stay perfectly tucked in and neat-looking throughout every scene. Film critic Roger Ebert got a chance to inspect the actual costume years later when his colleague Gene Siskel owned one of the screen-worn suits, and Ebert specifically noted this bizarre shirt design in his writing about the film. The Christie's auction house, which later sold the suit, provided even more detail about how this system worked, explaining that the elastic fabric attachment allowed Travolta the freedom to dance and move without any worry about his shirt coming untucked or bunching up awkwardly. For a movie that centered entirely on dance performances, this seemingly small costume detail made a huge difference in how polished and professional everything looked on screen. The shirt itself was made by a Spanish company called Pascal and was constructed from black polyester with white stitched broken stripes running through it. Travolta wore it with the top few buttons undone to show off his character's gold chains and chest hair, which was very much the style of the disco era. The combination of the body-hugging onesie design and the non-breathable polyester fabric meant that Travolta was essentially dancing in what amounted to a sweatsuit, which explains why the production needed two identical white suits so he could switch between them as one dried out after each sweaty dance sequence. Fact 3. Gene Siskel outbid Jane Fonda. In 1979, just a couple of years after Saturday Night Fever became a massive hit, one of John Travolta's screen-worn white suits went up for sale at a charity auction, and the bidding war that followed involved some surprising participants. Film critic Gene Siskel, who wrote for the Chicago Tribune and would later become famous for his movie review show with Roger Ebert, ended up winning the suit with a bid of $2,000. But what makes this story especially interesting is who he was competing against in those final moments of bidding. Academy Award-winning actress Jane Fonda was also trying to buy the suit, and her highest offer came in at $1,900, which meant Siskel outbid her by just $100 to take home the iconic costume. Siskel later recalled the exciting auction experience with clear pride, specifically mentioning that he had managed to outbid Jane Fonda for this piece of movie history. His love for Saturday Night Fever ran incredibly deep, as he famously watched the film at least 17 times when it first came out and called it his favorite movie of all time. For Siskel, owning that white suit wasn't just about having a cool piece of memorabilia, but represented something much more personal about what the film meant to him and how it captured the dreams and struggles of young people trying to escape their circumstances through dance and self-expression. The fact that a respected film critic was willing to spend that kind of money and compete with a Hollywood star for a polyester disco suit shows just how powerful the cultural impact of Saturday Night Fever really was. Siskel kept the suit hanging in a garment bag in his closet for the next 17 years, and it became one of his most prized possessions among his extensive collection of film and sports memorabilia, which also included items like Michael Jordan's rookie jersey and movie scripts signed by famous directors. Fact 4. Siskel's suit sold for $145,000. After treasuring John Travolta's white suit as one of his most prized possessions for 17 years, Gene Siskel decided to part with it in 1995 when the costume went up for auction at Christie's in New York. The bidding was fierce and competitive, with multiple collectors vying for this legendary piece of cinema history, and when the hammer finally came down, the suit sold for an absolutely staggering $145,000 to an anonymous European collector. This meant that Siskel had earned more than 72 times what he originally paid for it back at that charity auction in 1979, turning his $2,000 purchase into an incredible investment that few could have predicted. The sale set a record at the time for the highest price ever paid for a movie costume at auction, demonstrating just how much the cultural significance of Saturday Night Fever had grown over the nearly 2 decades since the film's release. The pre-sale estimate from Christie's had been somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000, so the final price of $145,000 was nearly 3 times higher than even the most optimistic predictions. During the auction, there was reportedly intense competition from multiple bidders, including Danae Terrio, the former host of the television show Dance Fever, who had actually taught Travolta how to dance for his role in the movie, bidding on behalf of Turner Broadcasting, but dropping out when the price reached $50,000. The suit came with a special personal touch that made it even more valuable to collectors, as Travolta himself had inscribed the interior lining with a message to Siskel that read, "To Gene, so here's to a classic. Your friend, John Travolta." This authentication and personal connection between the critic and the star added an extra layer of significance to an already iconic piece of movie memorabilia, helping to drive up the final auction price. Fact 5. The red dress never existed. If you've ever seen the iconic poster for Saturday Night Fever, you probably remember the striking image of John Travolta in his white suit dancing with Karen Lynn Gorney, who appears to be wearing a bright red dress that perfectly contrasts with his outfit. The problem is that this red dress never actually existed in the movie itself, and if you watch the famous dance competition scene, you'll notice that Gorney's character Stephanie is actually wearing a white dress, not red at all. This discrepancy between the poster and the actual film has confused audiences for decades, but Gorney herself eventually explained exactly why the studio made this creative decision for the promotional materials. In a 2011 interview with Media Mics, Gorney revealed the behind-the-scenes story of how the poster came to be. explaining that during the promotional photo shoots for the movie, she was photographed wearing dresses in every color imaginable. The studio wanted to test which color would look best for marketing purposes and would catch people's attention most effectively when the posters were displayed in theater lobbies and on billboards around the country. Gorney summed up the studio's reasoning with a simple and blunt explanation, saying, "Red sells. I think that's why it was used for the poster." The marketing team clearly believed that the bold red color would pop more visually and draw more eyes to the poster than a white dress would, even though it meant creating an image that didn't accurately represent what audiences would actually see in the theater. This kind of alteration was not uncommon in movie marketing, where the goal was to create the most eye-catching and memorable promotional image possible, rather than to provide a completely accurate representation of the film. The red dress became so iconic through the poster that many people who haven't watched the movie in years genuinely remember it being in the film, showing just how powerful movie marketing imagery can be in shaping our memories. Fact 6. Only 2 suits were made. Despite the enormous cultural impact of John Travolta's white suit and its status as one of the most recognizable costumes in film history, the production of Saturday Night Fever only created 2 identical versions of the complete outfit. This limited number wasn't due to any lack of importance placed on the costume, but rather reflected the practical realities of filming intense dance sequences in polyester, a fabric that absolutely does not breathe and causes anyone wearing it to sweat profusely. According to the DVD commentary for the film, Travolta would dance in one suit until he had sweated through it completely, at which point he would switch into the fresh backup suit while the first one was given time to dry out before being needed again. The decision to have 2 suits turned out to be absolutely essential for keeping the filming on schedule, because the demanding choreography required Travolta to perform the same moves over and over again for multiple takes. And doing that in head-to-toe polyester under hot studio lights meant he was constantly drenched in sweat. The non-breathable nature of polyester made it feel like dancing in a plastic bag, trapping all the body heat and moisture inside, which explains why continuity between takes would have been nearly impossible to maintain with just a single suit. Having that second identical suit meant that filming could continue without long breaks waiting for the costume to dry, and it also ensured that the suit would always look fresh and crisp on camera, rather than showing obvious sweat stains that would have been distracting to viewers. The fact that only 2 suits were made also adds to their value as collectibles today, since it means there are very few authentic screen-worn versions of this iconic costume in existence. Auction houses have specifically highlighted this rarity when selling the suits, noting that these are among the only genuine articles actually worn by Travolta during the production of one of the most influential dance films ever made. Fact 7. The suit had a 28-inch waist. When the Victoria and Albert Museum in London authenticated and documented John Travolta's white suit for their Hollywood costume exhibition, they discovered something quite remarkable about the measurements of the trousers. The white flared pants featured a waist size of just 28 inches, which is extremely small even by 1970s standards, and shows just how lean and fit Travolta had become through his preparation for the role. This tiny waist measurement wasn't just a random sizing choice by the costume designer, but rather a direct result of the incredibly intense dance training regimen that Travolta put himself through in the months leading up to filming Saturday Night Fever. Travolta trained for the role with an almost obsessive level of dedication, working with choreographers Lester Wilson and Danae Terrio for 3 hours every single day to perfect the dance moves that would make the film so memorable. This grueling rehearsal schedule, combined with running 2 miles daily, caused Travolta to lose 20 pounds from his frame, transforming his body into the sleek dancer's physique that audiences see on screen. The 28-inch waist represented the culmination of months of hard physical work and discipline, and it also reflected the aesthetic of disco fashion at the time, where tight-fitting pants that emphasized the hips and created long, lean lines were considered the height of style on the dance floor. The style of disco pants in the 1970s was all about creating a specific silhouette, with trousers that were extremely tight around the waist and hips, but then dramatically flared out at the ankles. A look that was considered both fashionable and functional for showing off dance moves. Film critic Roger Ebert later quoted someone describing disco pants as a marvel of modern engineering, so loose at the ankles yet so tight in the groin, which perfectly captures the almost architectural construction of these garments and the physical demands they placed on anyone wearing them. Fact 8. The suit retains Travolta's sweat stains. When one of John Travolta's original white suits went up for auction at Julien's Auctions in April of 2023, more than 45 years after the film was made, the costume still contained visible sweat marks from the actor around the waist area. Martin Nolan, the executive director of Julien's Auctions, openly discussed this unusual feature with reporters, explaining that the auction house had deliberately chosen not to clean or wash the suit before putting it up for sale. His reasoning was surprisingly straightforward and reveals something fascinating about what collectors actually want when they're buying movie memorabilia, as he told The Guardian that the sweat is how you know it's authentic, and went on to explain that potential buyers specifically wanted these kinds of imperfections and traces of the original actor. Nolan elaborated further on this philosophy, noting that it had been incredibly hot during the filming of Saturday Night Fever, which meant the sweat stains were still clearly visible around Travolta's waist area on the costume even after all these decades. He stated quite bluntly that we never wash memorabilia because people want the stains, the DNA, particularly when a suit like this one hasn't been auctioned before. This might seem strange or even off-putting to casual observers, but in the world of high-end movie memorabilia collecting, these kinds of authentic traces of the original performer are considered extremely valuable because they provide undeniable proof that this specific item was actually worn by the star during filming and not just a replica or costume that was made for the production but never used. The sweat stains serve as a kind of physical timestamp that connects the costume directly to those grueling dance sequences where Travolta performed under hot lights in non-breathable polyester, and they represent tangible evidence of the hard work and physical intensity that went into creating those iconic scenes. The suit eventually sold for $260,000 with all its imperfections intact. Fact 9. The suit was bought from the leading male. When Gene Siskel's screen-worn white suit eventually went up for auction at Christie's in 1995, the detailed listing provided some fascinating detective work about where the costume had originally come from decades earlier. Inside the suit jacket, there was still a manufacturer's label that identified the store where costume designer Patricia von Brandenstein had purchased it, a men's clothing shop called The Leading Male, that was located at the corner of Kings Highway and East 12th Street in the Midland section of Brooklyn. This discovery gave film historians and costume enthusiasts a concrete connection to the actual neighborhood stores that would have served the real-life working-class young men who inspired the characters in Saturday Night Fever. The fact that the suit came from a local Brooklyn shop rather than a Manhattan boutique or a Hollywood costume house was entirely intentional and fit perfectly with the authenticity that director John Badham and von Brandenstein were trying to achieve throughout the film. They wanted every element of the costumes to feel like something that Tony Manero and his friends could actually afford and would realistically wear, which meant shopping in the same kinds of stores where the actual residents of Bay Ridge and Bensonhurst would have bought their disco outfits in the mid-1970s. The Leading Male was exactly the type of neighborhood men's shop that catered to young guys who wanted to look sharp on Saturday nights without spending a fortune, offering affordable polyester suits and flashy accessories that captured the essence of disco style. By the time the suit was being examined and cataloged for auction, The Leading Male had long since closed its doors, like so many small independent clothing stores that disappeared over the decades as shopping habits changed and big retail chains moved in. The label inside the jacket became a small piece of Brooklyn history, documenting not just the origins of an iconic movie costume, but also the vanished landscape of neighborhood commerce that once defined working-class urban life. Fact 10. Travolta originally wanted black. The white suit that became one of the most recognizable costumes in cinema history almost never existed because John Travolta and director John Badham had originally envisioned the character wearing a sleek black suit for the climactic dance competition scene. The two men felt that black would look sophisticated and cool under the disco lights, fitting with the suave image they had in mind for Tony Manero's big moment on the dance floor. However, costume designer Patricia von Brandenstein had a completely different vision and managed to convince them that white was not only the better choice aesthetically, but also carried important symbolic meaning that would elevate the entire film. Von Brandenstein explained her reasoning to the Victoria and Albert Museum when they later displayed the suit in their Hollywood costume exhibition, revealing that she had two main arguments for why white was essential. First, from a purely practical filmmaking perspective, a white suit would photograph much better in the dark, colorful environment of the discotheque and would reflect the dazzling lighting effects in a way that black simply couldn't match, making Travolta stand out dramatically on screen. But beyond the technical advantages, von Brandenstein felt strongly that the white color carried deeper meaning for the character's arc, representing Tony Manero's personal journey from ignorance to enlightenment, as he began to question his life choices and aspire to something better than his dead-end existence in Brooklyn. This symbolic use of white connected to a long tradition in storytelling and mythology where heroes and champions have worn white to signify purity of purpose and dedication to their goals. Von Brandenstein's artistic instincts turned out to be absolutely correct, as the white suit became instantly iconic and has remained one of the most memorable costume choices in film history, proving that sometimes a costume designer's creative vision can completely transform how audiences perceive a character and remember a movie for decades to come. Fact 11. Travolta's family were secret extras. John Travolta kept a delightful secret about Saturday Night Fever hidden from the public for decades, finally revealing it during an appearance on the talk show Live with Kelly and Ryan more than 40 years after the film was released. Two of his family members had actually appeared in the movie as background extras in small uncredited roles, and most fans had watched the film multiple times without ever realizing they were looking at Travolta's real relatives. His sister Ann Travolta played the role of Pizza Girl, appearing as a waitress in the famous opening sequence where Tony Manero struts down the street and stops to buy slices of pizza, while his mother Helen Travolta had an even smaller part as a customer in the paint store where Tony's character worked during the day. These weren't speaking roles or major parts that would have drawn attention, but rather the kind of brief background appearances that blend seamlessly into the fabric of the film, making them perfect examples of the authentic Brooklyn atmosphere that director John Badham was trying to create. According to the Internet Movie Database, Ann's official role was simply listed as Pizza Girl, and Helen's was Lady in Paint Store, credits so minor that most viewers would never have thought to look them up or wonder about the identities of these background performers. When Travolta finally shared this information on the talk show, host Kelly Ripa's reaction was one of complete surprise, exclaiming, "Unbelievable," after learning that she had been watching members of the Travolta family all these years without knowing it. The revelation added a sweet personal dimension to the film, showing how Travolta's family supported his breakthrough role by participating in small ways, and it also explained why those particular extras might have seemed to have such natural chemistry and comfort around the young star during filming. Travolta seemed to enjoy finally letting audiences in on this long-kept family secret, clearly taking pleasure in the surprised reactions of people who thought they knew everything about this iconic movie. Fact 12. Travolta lost 20 pounds. Training. John Travolta's transformation into Tony Manero required an almost obsessive level of physical preparation that completely reshaped his body in the months leading up to filming Saturday Night Fever. The producers had initially suggested using a body double for some of the more demanding dance sequences. But Travolta absolutely insisted on performing all of his own dancing, which meant he needed to get into the best shape of his life to handle the grueling choreography. He worked with two choreographers, Lester Wilson and Danae Terrio, rehearsing for 3 full hours every single day to master the complex moves that would define the film's most memorable moments. And this intense training schedule caused him to lose a dramatic 20 pounds, which is about 9 kilograms from his frame. Travolta had a natural tendency to carry extra weight, so shedding 20 pounds required not just the dance rehearsals, but also a complete lifestyle change that included running 2 miles every day to build up his cardiovascular endurance and stamina. In interviews from that time period, Travolta described feeling like a horse wanting to get out by the time February rolled around and filming was about to begin, explaining that after months of this rigorous preparation, he was desperate to finally put all that training to use on camera. The weight loss and muscle toning were essential, not just for the athletic demands of the role, but also to achieve the sleek, lean silhouette that was considered stylish in disco fashion, where tight-fitting clothes showed off every line of the body. Lester Wilson, one of the choreographers, was particularly influential in shaping Travolta's dancing style, teaching him what he called hang time and infusing his movements with African-American rhythm that gave the performance its distinctive flavor and energy. The physical transformation was so complete that Travolta's body became as much a part of the character as his acting, with every move on the dance floor reflecting the months of dedication and hard work. Fact 13. The costume designer. Shop Times Square. Creating the authentic disco look for Saturday Night Fever didn't involve fancy Hollywood costume houses or designer boutiques, but rather required costume designer Patricia von Brandenstein to hit the streets of New York City with cast members in tow to find real clothing that actual disco-goers would have worn. Actor Paul Pape, who played the character Double J in the film, fondly remembered these shopping expeditions in interviews included with the 30th anniversary retrospective published by Vanity Fair in 2007. He recalled accompanying von Brandenstein on trips to Times Square, where they spent hours browsing through stores picking out polyester shirts, pants, jackets, and all the flashy costume jewelry that would complete the characters' looks for their Saturday night adventures at the disco. Pape spoke highly of von Brandenstein's instincts and taste during these shopping trips, noting that she had a great feel for it when it came to selecting pieces that captured the essence of mid-1970s disco fashion without looking like obvious movie costumes. The goal was to find clothing that looked like it could have been pulled straight from the closets of real Brooklyn teenagers and young adults who lived for their weekend nights on the dance floor, which meant seeking out the same kinds of affordable polyester garments and cheap but shiny accessories that working-class kids would actually be able to afford on their limited budgets. Times Square in the 1970s was very different from the tourist-friendly area it is today, filled with discount clothing stores, electronics shops, and all manner of businesses catering to New Yorkers looking for bargains. The hands-on approach of actually shopping in real stores rather than ordering custom-made costumes or pulling from existing studio wardrobe departments gave the film an authenticity that would have been nearly impossible to achieve otherwise, ensuring that every piece of clothing looked lived-in and genuine rather than too polished or theatrical. Fact 14. The 2023 auction suit sold for $260,000. Nearly half a century after Saturday Night Fever first hit theaters, one of John Travolta's original screen-worn white suits came up for auction again in April of 2023 at Julien's Auctions in California, and the bidding quickly demonstrated that the costume's value had only grown with time. The auction was part of a larger sale called Hollywood Classic and Contemporary that was organized jointly by Julien's Auctions and Turner Classic Movies, featuring iconic props and costumes from across film history. The white suit was positioned as the centerpiece and highlight of the entire event, with Martin Nolan, the executive director and founder of Julien's Auctions, describing it as truly a piece of cinematic dreams and one of the most prized pop culture artifacts ever to come to auction. Before the bidding began, auction organizers had estimated that the suit would sell for somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, which would have already been an impressive price for a movie costume. However, when the actual auction took place, the competitive bidding drove the final price far beyond these predictions, with the suit ultimately selling for $260,000, which was more than double the high end of the pre-sale estimate. This sale price demonstrated that even after multiple previous auctions and decades of public awareness about the costume's existence, collectors were still willing to pay extraordinary amounts to own this particular piece of film history. The auction listing described the suit as one of the most iconic costumes in the history of cinema and emphasized that it was one of only two known to exist that were actually used during the production of the film. The sale came with letters of authenticity from both Paramount Studios and John Travolta himself, providing ironclad documentation of the suit's provenance and ensuring that the winning bidder would have no doubts about owning a genuine piece of the original costume. Fact 15. The suit inspired heroic white. When costume designer Patricia von Brandenstein was making her case for why Tony Manero's suit absolutely needed to be white instead of black, she drew upon centuries of storytelling tradition and heroic symbolism to explain her artistic choice. In a statement she gave prior to one of the suit's auctions, von Brandenstein articulated her thinking with a reference that spanned from medieval legends all the way to early Hollywood westerns, explaining that heroes from Sir Lancelot to Tom Mix wore white in the great contests to express purity and single-minded devotion to the task at hand. This historical perspective on the color white in heroic narratives gave her argument a depth and weight that went far beyond simple aesthetic preferences or practical filming considerations. Sir Lancelot, one of the most famous knights of King Arthur's Round Table from medieval legend, was often depicted wearing white or silver armor during his most important quests and battles, symbolizing his noble character and pure intentions. Tom Mix, on the other hand, was one of the biggest cowboy stars of early silent films and talkies in the 1920s and 30s, and he famously wore white hats and light-colored outfits that made him instantly recognizable as the hero in contrast to villains who typically wore black. By connecting Tony Manero's white disco suit to this long tradition of heroic white costumes, von Brandenstein was elevating what could have been seen as just a dance movie into something with deeper mythological resonance. She concluded her explanation by saying, "So for me, white was the only choice for the suit," making it clear that once she had understood the symbolic importance of the color, no other option was even worth considering. Von Brandenstein also expressed her gratitude that our hero, John Travolta, and our producers also came to see it in this way, acknowledging that it took some convincing, but that everyone eventually understood why the white suit was essential to making Tony's moment of triumph on the dance floor feel truly heroic and transformative.